Today I want to take a look at how to locate the drive ID for a SharePoint document library and use that in a solution to make flows which can run across any environment. So to cut to the chase, there's a parameter for document libraries that's not the URL, not the title, and not the GUID. It's a drive ID. And this is a very special identifier. It's quite lengthy. There's a special API for getting them, underscore API v2.1 drives, and you can filter it with OData. But this is a drive ID. It is not the title of the document library. It's not the GUID. It's not the URL. It's something totally different. It's called a drive ID. And sometimes we need it in our flows depending on the action step we're using. You can look it up using underscore API v2.1/drives. And if you want to filter it to match by a particular name, you can do that too. In this particular case, we're saying filter name equals documents, which is right here. That's why we're getting a single row only. This is an array. Maybe it has many, but in our particular example, it has one only. So that's what we're working towards. That's what we have for availability. And let's go ahead and do a demo with a solution. So if you're developing a flow that needs to work across multiple environments, that requires you to use environment variables. So if I'm going to convert, say, a doc file to PDF, and I'm going to use this drive ID, how does that work when we lifecycle it to a new environment? When we're at a new URL, the drive ID is totally new. How do you make this lifecycle? How can you do this in a flexible way? Because, a lot of us make solutions, they're all hard-coded, they run great in dev, and then the topic comes up, how do we lifecycle, how do we transition this forward? And that's going to require some extra work. So here, if we have a document, we'll call it Hello World, and it lives in a SharePoint site, we're wanting to convert it to PDF. Okay, fair enough. We can do that. We can use the Word Online for Business connector. And the reason I'm picking this, instead of some of the other options, is that it requires drive ID. So here we're going to take the URL. We'll go ahead and put in our URL. We'll pick out our documents library, and we'll hard code our one Hello World file. The reason we're doing this is to demonstrate that it can successfully run using the hard-coded values. So we'll go to our flow runs history. We see it waking up. We see the success. And on the inputs, that drop-down where you selected documents, this is not a title being saved. If you look at the raw inputs, the API underneath is not the title, not the title. It is, however, using the drive ID. And that's what we actually need for this flow action to be successful. So from a lifecycle perspective, how do you develop this flow in a way that these things aren't hard-coded? Well, fair enough. We come over here and we can do add existing, and we'll go ahead and pick out our cloud flow from automation. We have one option. We'll go ahead and include it. So great, it's in a solution. We don't have an environment variable. We don't have a way of managing this, of modifying it. If I'm in the demo environment today, that's great. But what happens when we go up to UAT, we go up to production, we move it to some other system? It's just not that flexible. So here we want to go ahead and do more environment variable. And this one, we're going to call it demo SP site. Okay, and this is our demo site. And we're going to do the type of object as a data source from a SharePoint connector. We'll be prompted for login. Cool. And here we want to do a site itself. And we're going to copy the URL we were working with previously. Okay. And we'll go ahead and save the site. So now it has a site object, which is great because that knows about the URL, GUID, and all those things. It's not a text value. It's a rich object. It's a site. Now we're going to add one more environment variable for the list. So in this case, we'll do demo sp library. Same thing, data source, SharePoint. It's a list type. The site is our parent variable. That's why we did that a minute ago. We need to have the parent site variable first, so now we can go ahead and choose the child for the list. And here we'll do documents, and you can do some default values and what the current value is. There's reasons for why you would want those to be the same or different. As you move it forward in the lifecycle, you can override in a managed solution. But anyway, we have two environment variables, one for the library, one for the site. Okay, pretty cool, pretty cool. Bringing things together. I like it. So on the flow itself, instead of using these hard-coded values, we're going to change that to an environment variable. Okay, and if we go ahead and pick out so we're going to edit our flow now that we have environment variables, and we're going to edit the action for convert doc to PDF. We're going to clear this out. And when prompted for environment variable, we do the site first. And on this second one, for custom value, we'll do the library. One would think that's enough and that it would work correctly. I think we're about to get a surprise. So if I go ahead and test it manually and run the flow, it's feeding in the site object. It's feeding in the library object. Seems reasonable. Test failed. Why did it fail? The provided drive ID appears to be malformed or does not represent a valid drive. Now, one would reasonably ask, what on earth does that mean, right? That the input given for the drive is a GUID number from the SharePoint list environment variable. This thing doesn't want GUID numbers, it wants a drive ID. So if we come all the way back to our API, and yeah, we do have a GUID number for this particular list, and we could find that by doing our standard REST APIs of SharePoint. What we need to do is call this other API to go find the drive ID prior to using it in a step which is drive ID dependent. So doing a little bit of a query first, we send a HTTP request to SharePoint, we get the drive ID, and then we apply it into the flow next. So here's API, there's the filter. Okay, cool. We'll go ahead and put the site here on the first one. Yep, so there's the site, there's the call. Beautiful. We know what the output's going to look like. I already have that part. So we can do a compose and a parse JSON. So here we'll go for parse JSON, data operation, generate from a sample, paste in the payload from the other browser tab. The content will be the reply of the HTTP request. So that will parse it out. And then down here, we're not going to give it the environment variable. It wants the drive ID. It really, really wants the drive ID. There is one challenge. The minute I do this, it's going to make looping. Yeah, the looping. Because it views it as an array that it could potentially have more than one value coming back. Now we know from our use case that it's always going to give us this first one because that's an exact match on the name and we know it's only one. But this is maybe it has many. It is an array data type. We might have more going on. Okay, fine. So how do we get rid of the looping and make the flow a little more precise? We're going to copy the items out of both of these purple blocks. We're going to undo the whole for each thing, bring it back to where it was. And with this, we're going to do an expression. The copy that I took from those two purple blocks, the first one was the parse JSON value, and the next one was the ID parameter. What we want for our expression is to take the body of parse JSON, right? So that's the body coming out of this, But then we take the first row, which is the 0 index, and then we take the ID property. So we're going to make our own expression. Everything we had previously, square bracket 0, gives me the first one. I only want the first one. And then we do the ID property. That value right there, taking what the for each had, but then doing value. So this is what the body value is, right over here. So if we went to dynamic content and we searched for the parse JSON body, there you go, value. This item matches to this guy right here, right here. But we don't want the whole thing. We want the first row and we want the ID. So this expression is what we're going to go with. This is the notation that we need. Put the whole thing in there like that. Go ahead and save it. Now, instead of using our environment variable directly, we are using it indirectly. We are going to go to the site. We are going to find the drive, split out the ID, and then put the ID down here. So this is the drive ID. This is the parse JSON from the sample that we gave it. And this is our drive API endpoint. All of these things together, we'll go ahead and give it a test, see what happens. Test manually, execute, and run. New flow. Test is running. Check it out. That is a drive ID. Right here, we have success. We have the drive ID. It came from parsing out JSON, which found that, yep, here it is. It's for the documents. That was our name that we filtered. This was the HTTP call with the data coming back, right? So there's our filter of what the name should be. There's our drives API. So we call the API, we parse the response, and we then have an expression that gives us only what we need. And the output of this is that we do get the content of a PDF. So this is the PDF content. Now from here, you can do a lot of things. You could maybe attach it to an email. You could save it to a SharePoint document library. You could potentially save it to Dataverse. Whatever you want to do. You've got the payload. Maybe even send it back to Power Apps, right? On some sort of button click. There's a lot of things you could do with that content, that PDF content. But this shows you how to use the convert word to PDF step, which requires a drive ID, but doing it in a smart way that uses environment variables and APIs. So now your solution is flexible. You can take this solution with its flow, with its connection reference, with its environment variables, and this becomes something that is supportable for ALM lifecycle. With this in place, we can now lifecycle, go to UAT, go to prod, move it around, make it more flexible, less hard coding. Thank you guys for watching. Please leave a comment if you found it helpful. Have a good day.